Hi, everyone. So let's talk about sense perception. This is something that I introduced you to earlier in the week, but hopefully I can kind of elaborate on that a little bit more here. So you should know what sense perception is by this point. It's kind of this ongoing debate that Shakespeare has with his audience uh, in relation to what is the most reliable way to take in the world around you. We see all of his characters and nearly all of his plays struggling with how best to, who to believe, what to believe. Should they believe their eyes? Should they believe their ears? Um, and so I wanted to return to one of the passages that we did a close reading on earlier this week, but I want to apply that lens of sense perception that I introduced to you later on so that we can get a better understanding for how we would use this concept. There's a very important, ongoing and central concept in our actual close readings while keeping Fuchs in mind. So I wanted to pull up this speech by Lady Capulet given to Juliet to specifically point out some of the best ways that sense perception is talked about in this play, even explicitly talked about. So I'm just going to read this aloud. What say you? Can you love the gentleman? This night you shall behold him at our feast. Read over the volume of young Paris's face and find delight writ there with beauty's pen. Examine every married lineament and see how one another lends content. And what obscured in this fair volume lies, find written in the margin of his eyes. This precious book of love, this unbound lover, to beautify him only lacks a cover. The fish lives in the sea, and 'tis much pride, for fair without the fair within to hide, that in gold clasps locks in the golden story. So share all that he doth possess, by having him, making yourself no less. And so as we can see right here, Lady Capulet is essentially telling Juliet that all she has to do is take one look at Paris and she will immediately fall in love. As we discussed earlier, as you've probably read by this point, there's really no traction to that. Juliet and Romeo don't share the same values as the rest of the cast. They don't really share the same roles that the rest of the cast falls into. They're rebels in pretty much every sense of the word. And so when it comes to this speech, let's first look at some of the language that Lady Capulet uses. So she uses a lot of vision-centered language. Behold, you shall behold him. Read over the volume of young Paris's face and find delight written there with beauty's pen. You read what is written on his face just by looking at him. Examine, that's another vision-centered word, and see how another lends content. And so it's interesting that she uses so much of this I-centered language. And to skip ahead just a little bit, Juliet even claps back at Lady Capulet, her mother, and says, I'll look to like if looking like you move, which is important. I'll come back to that. But no more deep will I endart mine eye, than your consent gives strength to make it fly. And so from her reply, I know that we've talked about just kind of using what you see written on the page, but in this context, we kind of need to know exactly where Juliet stands on this sense perception issue. But with what Juliet replies to Lady Capulet, we see that she really isn't buying into the whole love at first sight idea, which is kind of ironic given the way that her and Romeo fall in love. But Lady Capulet is actually making a really interesting metaphor from this. She's basically saying that Paris is a book that can be read simply by looking at him. You don't need to talk to him, although if you do, you'll find that you share a lot of interest with him, but that you really shouldn't worry about that, because all you need to know is that that is written on his face. But one of the most key parts of this passage is to beautify him only lacks a cover. So what exactly does that mean? So she's already of the belief that Paris is something that you just need to look at. And if you find him beautiful, then boom, you're in love with him. And she talks about how he is a book. He is the pages of a book. He is the content of that book. He is the part that you read. To beautify him only lacks a cover. What is the cover? What's the cover of that book? She's referring to Juliet. She's saying that if she were to be in a relationship with Paris, if she were to be married to Paris, then she would simply be the cover on Paris's book. And that's pretty insulting, isn't it? That's something that, she's insinuating that Juliet doesn't have substance, that Juliet simply provides the pretty cherry on top, when it comes to Paris. And so when it comes to sense perception within this, she's already kind of garnered a lot of skepticism from Juliet. And Juliet really doesn't believe that looking at Paris is the most reliable way to judge the content of his character. She uses a lot of other really heavily beautifying language. That in gold clasps locks in the golden story by having him making yourself no less. That's interesting, considering the fact that she implied that she was only worth the cover of his book. Making herself any less than that, I don't really know what that would be, but she already doesn't consider Juliet to be of very high potential. She simply considers her to be someone that she can marry off to Paris in a diplomatic sense. And so let's return to Juliet's reply. I'll look to like if looking liking move, but no more deep lie and dart mine eye, than your consent gives it strength to make it fly. Let's look at this first line here. I'll look to like if looking liking move. So the word move here is very interesting. She's talking about how she is not fully in control of herself if she looks at Paris, and if by some magical sense she finds him so beautiful that she falls in love, she's acknowledging that she has no control over that desire, which is extremely mature considering that her character is supposed to be 13, but there's a lot more in this play that is concerning if we were to look at it through that lens. But no more deep lie and dart mine eye. So she's basically saying that she can control what will happen if she does happen to look at him and fall in love. But she is saying that she will not make an attempt to try to fall in love with him. She's going to look at him, but she's not going to pursue him any further than the look. Then your consent gives it strength to make it fly. Essentially, she's acknowledging that her mother does have the ability to tell her no. She's respecting her role and her mother's role in their relationship. She is above her. And we'll see that perspective change a little bit as the play continues. A lot, a bit. And so Juliet is essentially saying that she can control her senses. And that's why she's relying on her usage of her eyes to make a judgment on Paris. For example, if she was talking to him, then she wouldn't necessarily be able to control what she hears. You can't hear a noise and just tune it out, right? You have to hear it or go out of earshot of it. But you can control your eyes, which is why she's relying on her control of that sense to just look away, or to have the maturity to know that she can't necessarily trust any judgments that she makes just based off of his looks. And so this is kind of the heart of the sense perception debate in Romeo and Juliet. I wanted to go over this. I really hope this wasn't too convoluted. But I wanted to go over this because we'll talk about this more in class, and I'll answer any questions you may have. But this is kind of what a close reading looks like when you take certain points and certain debates into consideration when you go into it, which you really should be doing when you make a close reading. You should have a question or a hypothesis in your mind, having supposedly already read the play before you go into the close reading. So this is kind of one example of something that you can take into your close readings to focus on and to drive your close readings. So I really hoped that this helped a little bit. And we'll talk about more of this week. And I will see you on Monday.